pleasure to have you today to discuss how data-centricity approaches are transforming the life science industry. It's a pleasure for me to have such a panel today, and I would like to start with introducing each of our panel members. First, Angeli Möller. Then she started her career on oncology and neurodegenerative disease research. She moved progressively to informatics and joining Thomson Reuters as a data scientist. Then she has joined the pharmaceutical industry with Bayer first, with informatics team and commercial teams. And since July, Angeli has joined Roche. She's now head of data and integration generating insight across several divisions from diagnostic and pharma division. Thank you, Angeli, to be there today. Najat, I'm wondering if I should present Najat. You have been on the stage
no introduction.
The whole morning. But nevertheless, it's a pleasure to have you this morning. You are Chief Data Science Officer and Global Head of Strategy and Operation at Janssen Research and Development. And in that role, you are reviewing pipelines, the pipelines end-to-end integration across Janssen Pharmaceutical. Then, Mahesh, you are CIO of UK Biobank. You are responsible for the data and technology that underpins the UK Biobank. As former bioinformatician, you also made a switch to transition into IT early in your career. You retain close to the scientific roots by specializing in research computing, but also large-scale analysis, democratizing data access, and addressing scientific inequity. Then prior to joining UK Biobank, Mahesh was head of research computing at Russell Group University and commercial lead in genomics and life science research at both OCF and Amazon Web Service. Then Faisal Khan, then you are a corporate vice president and AI and analytics at Novo Nordisk. Your team focuses on application of AI and data science through drug development lifecycle with the intersection of data science, digital health, biostatistics, bioimaging, personalized medicine and health care delivery. You have a huge track record also into application of machine learning and artificial intelligence for healthcare and life sciences. Then welcome to this panel and to this discussion. Before we start, I would like to share I have a dream. I have a dream that we are able to provide knowledge, insight to our researcher every day in every other decision, across industry, across division, across department, from target identification to medical affairs, that we are able to distribute the knowledge, that our scientists, our researchers are able to reach out to the right piece of information, making decisions easier, faster, and better for at the end delivering to our patient. Then it's my dream, and it's also why I have this mission with ONTOFORCE. And basically, I would like to know today, where are we on this dream? Is this dream come true? Where are we? What are the challenges that we have been facing so far to making our organization data-driven? Perhaps, Mahesh, if you want to start, as UK Biobank, you are democratizing data access for a lot of organizations and companies.
Yeah, thank you, Bérénice. I think, UK Biobank, for me, is one of those organizations that exemplifies what we're trying to achieve here. I think from its inception, it's always been a data-centric organization. But, to begin with, we were taking data and information from our participants, but also at baseline, we took biological samples. And I think kind of in those first 10 years of collecting information, one of the harder things to do was look after those biological samples. So there was lots of focus on how do we make sure that the blood is preserved, the urine and saliva samples are preserved. And, Biobank is in our name. And so that was kind of the key focus of what we do. But the reason we took those tissue samples and we continued to collect that data on our participants is we knew that this is a data resource. That's where the insights are going to come from. We took those samples because we knew the technology at the time didn't exist to generate the further insights and deeper insights and data that we needed on people. And sort of 5 years ago was where that really started to bear fruit. So 5 years ago was where a consortium of partners came together to do the whole exome sequencing, and that would prove to be a success. And so that was followed up with whole genome sequencing. And we went from an organization that was looking after biological samples. We had terabytes of data, admittedly, hundreds of terabytes of data, but we just jumped. I mean, it was an absolute leap to go from there to 5 years ago, we had 15 petabytes of data. 2 days ago, we had 27 petabytes of data. That is a completely different paradigm. So we had to switch from being a biological sample organization to a very data-centric organization. One of our missions has always been about democratizing access to that data. So we have a fair and completely open and equal access policy. So it doesn't matter if you're a researcher from academia, whether you're a commercial researcher, whether that's pharma, whether that's technology, you have the same type of access to UK Biobank as each other. You pay the same prices as each other. The only exceptions to that are people from low and middle income countries or early career researchers who we try to further support by reducing those fees as far as we possibly can do. So our original model for data distribution was, we'll put it on a USB stick, we'll share it with you, we'll get the data to you, because that was the best way to get data to people. The cloud wasn't really properly a thing, trying to teach biologists how to kind of SSH into a new server. And 10 years ago, that was a big ask. Bioinformatics kind of exploded during that past decade, but again, was a specialized thing. But when you've got 15 petabytes of data, or at the end of whole genome, 25 petabytes of data, moving that around, can you imagine if I said to you, yeah, sure, you can have access. Give me 6 months to move that data to you. Not going to be up for that. So we had to change the way we do this. We came up with the idea of a research analysis platform. So we are living, as a research computing person, we're living the dream of the data stays where it should be, and the researchers come to the data. I came to realize that that dream has a flip side where, okay, you're bringing the researchers to the data. Now you have to do the things to make researchers happy and capable and give them the tools to do the analyses they want. To go back to my old HPC days and remember that actually everybody likes a slightly different version of the tool that they want to use. So how do I make sure that everyone can bring their own analyses? But how do I make sure they can't take out the personally identifiable data? So there's lots of kind of pros and cons to that. But I think on the whole, bringing people to that data is the best way to do that. And that increases democratization, because now, again, you don't have to have 25 petabytes of storage. You don't have to have access to an HPC cluster to do the analysis. It doesn't matter which country in the world you're in, you can access the platform. We have $500,000 per year in funds that we can give to researchers from low middle income countries. So we're trying to support that in a kind of different way around. But that required a lot of change, business process change, how we interact with our researchers change. And the download model exists. It continues to exist because we're getting to the point where the platform needs to be good enough that people preferentially choose that. And we're making good strides on that, I think.
Thank you. Go ahead, Faisal.
Well, I just wanted to comment on that. First of all, I love the UK Biobank, so fantastic resource. But as a practitioner, one of the trends that I'm seeing is data repositories or data harmonizers saying, come to us, we have our data. Now, what that's resulting in sometimes is a very fragmented landscape.
Yep.
Because the UK Biobank is perhaps a big enough center of gravity that you can get people to come to you. But as a practitioner, I have maybe 30 different people saying, we have a lot of data, please come to us on our platform. That's how we're going to make it available. And there's all sorts of reasons. GDPR, HIPAA, patient privacy, et cetera. But from a large-scale perspective, I'm a data junkie. I want as much data as possible. And I'd like to be able to connect public data sets with our own private data sets, with other data sets that perhaps we're unable to connect, either due to technological reasons or reasons such as data was just acquired differently, et cetera. So while I value that perspective, I think we as an industry are going to have to come to terms with that to a certain extent, because it's just unfeasible for us to go out and to 50 different fragmented platforms and try to run our code in multiple different areas, even though people talk about the promise of federated learning. So I think there's a balance there to strike somehow, and I quite frankly don't know where it is.
Yeah.
But sometimes UK Biobank being one of them, we say, okay, maybe we can get a small cut of the data that's useful for us, or we'll come to your platform, get an answer that we need, and then take it back into our systems. But at the end of the day, I don't think you'll see a wholesale migration to distributed, go where the data is. And so there's a balance there to figure out, and I don't know what that is. Maybe some other folks do.
Well, yes and no. But maybe I'll go back to the question you asked, which is you have a dream, and where are we on that dream? And I think there are some really good points on one of the early parts of the dream, which is understanding what is the biology that's driving the disease. We're one of the founding members of UK Biobank. I think great job in terms of actually getting this together. It's a large, complex, longitudinal data set that is actually getting better with every day and every month. Would love the data sets to be all more connected, but just very practically, even having a UK Biobank helps us to better understand, who is at, who's actually, what's driving the disease, but also patient stratification and other aspects. So to your answer, listen, I would say in the target identification, understanding the drivers of disease, we're probably, a lot of you watch football, we're probably like 10, 15 minutes into the game. The reason is there's a lot we still don't know. UK Biobank is great, but we need more diversity in our data sets, right? We need more imaging data. We need not just omics, which is great, but we need it linked to the real world data. So there's a lot of aspects that are still building and growing, right? I would say then the next part comes around, how can you make the right molecule? So my background is a scientist, as a computer scientist, and somebody who always thinks about how can you actually turn that into patient impact. I would say one of the things that we struggle in this industry is making the right compounds, right? The right molecules, small molecule, antibodies, and so forth. I think there's quite a bit to do with AI machine learning. We're still in the 20, 25-minute mark of the game. The reason for that is the validation, the jury's still out on that, right? A lot of people say we have this AI-built molecule. Well, I always ask, what's your validation data? Don't really care where it came from. Have we validated with current functional assays, new functional assays, that this actually works? And then the third thing I'd say from a clinical development perspective, so moving on from discovery to clinical development once you're in human trials, I do think the maturity is much higher, especially for companies that are doing it at scale, or even great biotech companies. Yours was a great example of how you can leverage current data to do more. There, I think, be more intelligent in how you design the trial. So you go after the right patients, diagnose patients earlier, run the right trials, go to where the patients are, not to where we know the sites. I think you see a lot more maturity in what's happening there. The challenge, though, is a lot around the deployment of some of these insights, right? So take great algorithms that can detect somebody, a disease earlier. How do you actually deploy it in health systems? You have to ensure that all of the health systems either have a standardized approach or their technical prowess is actually high enough where you can not just deploy, but then monitor. So you're doing it in a very responsible way. Getting adoptions from physicians. I mean, I always talk about the human element is as hard, if not harder, than the technical aspect. And then also in terms of clinical trials, like I don't know if you have our CRO partners in the room, but when we look at it from a data-driven perspective, where are the patients actually? There's a lot of gaps where we actually don't have research sites. How do we work together to actually lift a lot of these research sites? Quite frankly, more diverse patients are in areas where we have less research sites. Not surprising. So I think we have impact, but there's so much we can do to actually achieve what we need there. And then the last thing from a commercialization, how do you get that medicine to a patient? I think we're probably, just like in the clinical development, close to like 30, 35 minutes into the game, but more to do. So all in all, I think your dream is great. We should not reduce the aspiration from a dream, but we need to work collectively to actually enhance the different elements of how we go from an idea to the medicine in the hands of a patient, and then focus and realize that it is pretty variable across the value chain. That's okay.
Angeli, perhaps you want to add something?
Yeah, I think it's just okay. We jumped around a lot. So before I answer the question, I also wanted to just shout out. This is the Biobank fan club, the UK Biobank fan club. You probably noticed that, and I would say also I have some very close relatives who donate. I think we're so proud of the UK Biobank in the UK, and I'm sure you know that and hear that quite often. It's such a tremendous asset.
Yeah, we would be nothing without our participants.
It's amazing.
So, yeah.
And so I wanted to talk a little bit around the dream that data is accessible across all functions, all divisions. And so you talked a little bit around what it looks like in maybe a big pharma company. That's something where some of us have a lot of experience there. I would say that it's been a tremendous amount of progress that, as Najat pointed out, the understanding of what real-world data can do for clinical trial design has just bloomed. I remember going into meetings 5 years ago, maybe with some of the people in this audience, and then you would get, no, that's not going to work. We can't use those types of models to come up with our inclusion-exclusion criteria. We can't design a trial without that arm. And now it happens. Now it is reality. And that means it's a much shorter time until we can bring our innovative products to market. And so that's been a tremendous step forward. I think right now we're doing a lot more in production. So as we have more cell and gene therapies, how can we use our data sets to optimize that? And also, I think your metaphor there was an American football one, the 25 minutes. But I think there's a lot more.
European.
Is that
Global,
European?
Yeah,
Okay.
90 minutes. We're not even at halftime.
We're not even at halftime. Well, I think that's very true for really starting to have these multi-layered data sets. So my background's in proteomics, and we've heard a lot about genomics today, and it has been transformative. But we know that a cell is much more complex, and we know that a body is much more complex than a cell. And so as we start to create increasingly complex models that can allow us to truly understand biology, truly understand disease, I think you're right, we're only at the beginning of that process, but it's going to be really exciting to see how that develops during the lifetime of the careers of everyone in this room as we work on that together. I was really intrigued by the point, do we have to get the data together? Can we leave the data where it is? That's a big debate for all of us. I have to say, in the rare disease space, we've seen a lot of progress because the patients really want to donate their data. We see a lot of progress in building that into integrated data sets where the patients can control the data. So there's a charity called RareX, which really focuses on that. And then the patient can say who should access their data. I do have to say, with huge rates of undiagnosed patients in the rare disease community, you see that it's more of a switch of please take my data. Please help me figure out what's going on here. I would say, though, when we talk about federated learning, and many of us were involved or followed the IMI Melody project, I think it's a year and a half there of first trying to get everyone to follow the same data standard. And so I do think it can be incredibly powerful, and I know that we're probably all sick about hearing about data standards. Most people in this room have probably spent some part of their career working on data standards. But I do think that still is going to be critical for the large-scale analysis we want to do in the future. It's a never-ending loop. I used to do some work for CDISC on their pharmacogenomic data sets and trying to get those standardized. Every new innovation and every new innovation from Illumina and similar companies means that there's a new type of data, there's a new type of data standard that needs to be developed. We all have to agree on it internationally. We all have to start using it internationally. But I think that if we do put in that effort, federated learning does hold a lot of promise. And we have some publications today from colleagues I see in the front row talking about progress that's been made in that field.
Great, thank you. My next question will be like, what does it take for a company to have a data-centric approach? And Angeli, last year, as a former global data asset lead at Bayer, you were here at BioTechX presenting about the data 360. I know that at Mesh, at Roche, you have decided to take another approach with the data mesh. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So if everyone caught that, Bérénice has caught me for last year, having spoken about data 360s and data hubs and how they were the best things in sliced bread. And now this year at conferences talking about data mesh and having a different approach to data management. And so why did that happen? So as you heard, I've been doing different roles in translational medicine and informatics for several years. And we really started off at a place where we said, okay, We believe this data set, so claims data is a really obvious example, can be used by multiple parts of the company for multiple purposes. So we copied a model, which I'll be transparent, I copied from Monsanto, where they had a global data asset hub that managed all of that data and then was accountable for making sure that it could be reused for all of those multiple purposes, for bringing it in, ingesting it, standardizing it, and then provisioning it back to the company. So why do we not follow that approach anymore and intentionally at Roche are following a data mesh approach? It's simply speed. So it's very clunky. You'll always have this rate limiting step of how big is your global data asset team. When you're hiring that team, and this is very operational, you need the skill sets of data management and integration that belong with every different domain in your company. You need commercial skill sets. You need regional electronic medical record understanding. You need proteomics, RNA understanding, DNA understanding. And so in the end, we moved to a model where we said, no, that expertise will sit in the domain where it naturally fits. So we will keep the proteomics colleagues in research. We won't pull them into a central team. We will leave the commercial informaticians with the commercial team and stay close to that part of the business. And in the end, we as a central team will make sure that we have a set of architectural principles, a set of data principles, some integration standards, and we will make sure that everybody's data products that they own and maintain can be used by the entire company. And we have found, and many companies have found, that leads to much faster results and much more scalable results. So it's an organizational change, which is and I'll put it down to experience. So maybe in 4 years, I'll come back here and I'll have found a different model that works better.
Good. As we are between us, could you share some success story about data centricity? What do you have like some example about what kind of success you have had in your company? Perhaps Faisal, if you want to start.
Sure. Well, I'd like to build on a previous comment as well by the fact that I think companies are starting to realize that data is perhaps their most valuable asset. Even 10 years ago, somebody recruited me by saying, they don't realize it, but this company is a data science company that doesn't know it's a data science company. And I think we're realizing that in the life sciences, everything we do is driven by data. If we want to bring a new therapy, a new service, a new diagnosis to patients, it's all based on understanding a disease, validating whatever we've developed, taking it through the whole regulatory process. And even our commercial sales and marketing folks treat their job as a data exercise now. What we're realizing, though, is at the heart of everything, we can't bring all these different data sets together. We can't harmonize them. We can't connect them. That's a 10-year activity, and standards and best practices change every 3 years. But what we can do is try to be more nimble, more agile. We can try to make sure that there's role specialization so that folks who are perhaps more algorithmic in nature aren't spending 90% of their time getting data ready. Maybe they can knock that down to 20 to 30% of their time because there's folks who specialize in being data stewards or data engineers. But I think if we look across the industry, in my opinion, the most success we've actually seen is in the oncology space. Compared to all other therapeutic areas, oncology has really pushed the boundaries of what you can do with data in the stereotypical kind of data science lens, bringing together data to understand disease characteristics, to understand patient populations, derive personalized treatments for them. It's not just, we're still giving out statins and prescribing aspirin and other TAs. But in oncology, we've gotten very specific. We understand now that cancer is not just one disease. Breast cancer is not just one disease. And there's many different ways to treat it. So I really look to the success stories across the industry in diagnostics, in personalized treatment, in adverse event risk monitoring, even in, as Najat was saying, drug synthesis and artificial intelligence, machine learning methods to develop new compounds. There's a plethora of success stories there that I think other TAs can learn from, and a lot of opportunities to build on.
Angeli, I know that you have also like an example across division between diagnostic and pharma in diabetes.
Yeah, that's true. I'm really excited at the moment because in July, Roche went through a transformation that created an informatics team that covers both diagnostics and pharma. And we also have touch points where we support the diabetes care team. And then that really changed the game somewhat for us. And one of the examples we had before that occurred, but was one of the proof points that said this could be a very important step forward for us, was in Argentina. So my role used to be looking after our affiliates. And the team in Argentina took some data sets which were from our diabetes care area and used by the diagnostics team. And they were really looking at the progression of a diabetic patient. And that's one of our core areas of expertise. But then in the pharma division, we were starting to launch in ophthalmology. And so what we were able to do was to take that data and start to have risk profiling of diabetic macular edema, because we all know these diseases don't live in isolation, but rather we have a spectrum and a journey that goes from cardiovascular diabetes all the way through to these ophthalmology disorders. And so we were able to then come up with very accurate risk profiles for specific patient populations, specific hospital networks in Argentina. And we were using them together with a role we have at Roche called a patient journey partner to have more meaningful discussions with NGOs and with our healthcare partners, really to say, okay, at your hospital network with your population, which may be an urban population, a rural population, may have this diet or this standard of care, this is the risk profile and the likelihood that we will see their progression into diabetic macular edema, and thereby, and to your point around the importance of diagnostics, have one, in some cases, the intervention come at the right time, but of course, really looking to come earlier in the patient journey with the diagnostic at the right time to prevent progression.
Maybe one example I'll share, because Mahesh is sitting next to me, in terms of using UK Biobank, right? I think Faisal really nicely talked about, oncology and the precision medicine and the progress that's been made. The unmet need that exists with other diseases, right, in immunology and neuroscience are huge, and I touched on that a little bit in my talk. So let's take some of the diseases there, like Alzheimer's. It's named after a person. It's not named after the driver of the disease, right? Parkinson's, same issue. Depression, major depressive disorder. That's as broad of a label as you can have for a disease. So being able to connect biology to actually what's happening from a disease perspective is super important. So, we used recently the UK Biobank and looking at a lot of the omics data connected to some of the real world data as you're doing that, to mechanistically and phenotypically stratify patients in major depressive disorder into clusters of those that would actually have more severe, moderate, and so forth disease. And it's actually based on a pathway or a genetic signature. So that's very, very different if you think today how major depressive disorder is categorized as depression with insomnia, depression with anxiety. I mean, that's just the outcome. That's not actually what's driving the disease. So again, it comes back to the fundamental first order principles and to the basics. You understand what's actually happening, you can do all of these things much better. So that's just an example on UK Biobank, and then we validate it with our clinical teams. And then, maybe something completely on the other end of the spectrum, we talked a lot about diversity in terms of our clinical trials. The FDA has shared guidance. Many regulators are now sharing more guidance on having the right diversity. What we have done is instead of engaging with trial sites that we have known for a long period of time and everybody's going, what if you flip that around? So take some of the claims data that Angeli was mentioning. Take some of the lab data, which is now all connected EHR data, de-identified, of course, and then be actually able to pinpoint based on your inclusion-exclusion criteria, which Anne discussed, she's somewhere in the audience, I think, where those patients are in a de-identified. So almost like a hotspot for where your patient population is. Then overlay that with where the providers are. And then you'll see, and we've seen this in rare diseases, prevalent diseases, that 60, 70% on average of our patient population is not where we are as an industry. I'm not just talking about a pharma company. And if you then overlay how many diverse patients, the percentage of diverse patients, that's usually like 2x higher in more of the community clinics than the academic medical centers. Now, there's great work being done in terms of bringing decentralized trials, really trying to lower the burden. But to go to where the patients are, we talk about patient centricity, is probably the core of what we should do. So anyways, long story short, we have done that. We've done that approach. We've actually increased recruitment by about 1.5x in large prevalent diseases, over 2x in rare diseases. We did that for the COVID vaccine too, bringing that in about 4 months, 8 weeks in advance. So why does it all matter, right? You're getting the medicines to the patients faster, and you're testing it in the patient that you will treat, which is what we always say we should do. So there, again, the maturity is quite high. I think we can do it more. And there, having more interconnected data sets actually becomes more important, right? So you can get that scale. Imagine if you do that across Europe. We are starting to do that more in the US. Also in Asia, the data sets are getting better. So those are just a couple of examples from understanding the first order principles. What's causing the disease, right? Don't tell me it's prostate cancer. That's the organ where it's happening. Is it a mutation? Is it some pathway? And then going to where the patients are to actually do the trials. The last thing I'll also say is decentralized trials is something that we're working on a lot. I think Anne mentioned that in our presentation. We're also doing that for one example. In this immunoderm disease that we're in, we actually did a fully remote trial. We launched that earlier this year. We recruited the first patient within 45 minutes of going live, right? And so far, we've recruited patients much, much faster. But what's interesting, going back to the diversity point, as you can see, that's very important to me, over half our patient population is diverse. That never happens. We get to like 10% at best. So it really makes a difference when you reduce the patient burden and the provider burden for patients, especially patients that are in need and from challenging socioeconomic status.
Thank you.
I love the fact that you had an idea and you went to UK Biobank to start to validate that. And I think that's the importance of having large hypothesis-independent data sets that continue to grow. So, we've talked about the genetic data. We've got imaging coming on 100,000 people and then repeat imaging on 60,000 of those people. And we were really fortunate, feels like the wrong word to use when talking about the pandemic, but in some ways fortunate in that we imaged a portion of those before the pandemic. As soon as we realized what was going on, we got those same people to come back. So now we have what I think is the world's only kind of, scientifically controlled pre and post-pandemic data set. You talk about proteomics being important. We've got a pilot study on proteomics, the results of which are coming out, I think, spring next year. We're looking at methylation. And it's all of these sorts of things. It's the feedback from these sorts of conversations that turn into, okay, what's the next thing that we need to do across this whole cohort? And I think you're absolutely right about being able to scale that across multiple studies. And yes, it's challenging. I think it's the only way to be able to do this because everybody's got a good reason not to let their data out. But instead of sitting there saying, we have to do this, we're trying to take some practical steps. And so UK Biobank have been doing some work with all of us, the study in the States, to see how can we take some kind of standard analyses that people would do, how do we turn that into something that is essentially containerized and run it in both, and run it in a pooled place and see scientifically, is there actually a difference? Or is the challenge just, it's harder because you have to run it there and then you have to run it there, which is solvable from a technology perspective. You have beacons in between and you go, here's my question, send it out to these places. So I think there's lots of kind of steps forward, as you say, in those respects.
Thank you for sharing some success. Then I would like to go to the last question. Then could you, from your point of view, give like 3 or 4 opportunities where we have to focus to be able to transform fully into a data-centric organization? Do we need pre-competitive work? Are we still on the basic of FAIR? Do we need to also transform people to follow the transformation? Where are the focus of the next years?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick that off. And I think you slightly alluded to the 2 answers that I'm going to give. So if you've seen me talk here before, you'll know that I love science and technology and could afterwards bore anyone who wants to talk to me at depth about our models or our technology stack. But I do have to say that this year, for the first time in my team, we've really built out a capability for data culture and literacy. And that is because as we are increasingly working with the whole organization, so with our general managers, with our pricing teams, with our patient journey partners, with our rare disease partners, we're seeing that every single member of the Roche team needs to understand how data can drive their decisions, need to understand how there might be inherent biases in their decision making. Not everyone needs to be a data scientist. Everybody, it's more about logical thought and how might their decisions be influenced by different data sets, how might looking at a wider data set play a role into their decision making. And so that's a big area of focus for us. And then for those of you who are here tomorrow, you will see a talk by the Alliance for Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare, where Najat and I have both been board members, founding board members for the past 3 years. And that is a commitment, a time commitment that we make because we really do believe, as you said, Bérénice, that these pre-competitive collaborations are so important. If you want to work on what is a standard set of modules, of algorithms and risk prediction sets that we want to have available for every international data set, how can we tell whether or not this data set is of sufficiently high quality? What are the things that we simply need to do together rather than doing under the confidentiality of our own individual companies? What are the things we need to do for patients that we can't simply do sitting by ourselves? And those are things that we strive to do within the Alliance, working together and really driving them forward together. So that's our areas of focus.
I'd like to share two perhaps areas that we haven't talked about so far. We often talk about the transformation needed in data, in architecture, information systems, algorithms. People love to talk about the transformation in algorithms. But I think one of the things we have to recognize is the transformation in talent. We're changing. This is no longer a niche area. And it's an exploding area, and it's data science in general across many industries is an area that's a hot field. But as we start to get into the space, as this field starts to mature, we're getting beyond the space where early career talent comes in, perhaps new grads who are working on data and working with algorithms to do something. What do their career paths look like with 10, 15, 20 years of experience? How do they keep advancing in their career to stay engaged? Is it an individual contributor specialist track? Is it a management track? The technological industry, for example, has had tracks where you could be an Intel fellow and you're a very senior scientist getting paid as much as EVPs, but because you specialize in core technology. We haven't seen that evolve in data sciences, particularly within the life sciences. And this, if we want to hold on to our talent, if we want to show them that, hey, you can have a career and a life here, we need to look at the transformation within the talent space. And the last thing that I'll say is, as we look at all these different transformations, the core thing to keep in mind, at least for me, is always data science is cool. I'm a data geek. But at the end of the day, we can't be a science fair project. We're getting past the point where people are saying, let's throw money at an interesting data science or analytics problem. Now questions are being asked about the value, the ROI. So how do we support the critical path of whatever enterprise in life sciences that we're a part of? In some cases, it's a purely data offering, like a digital therapeutic, but in many cases, for example, those of us in pharma, we want to make sure that we're helping, as has been said many times today, getting the right medications to patients faster. So how do we help accelerate and optimize the critical path rather than doing things on the side is still somewhere we're maybe 20 minutes into that transformation journey.
Mahesh, do you want to add something?
I think two things really. Like you said, that pre-competitive space is super important. I think we've already got some really good examples of that. We wouldn't have the whole exome data or the whole genome data if it wasn't for that pre-competitive space. The same is brewing for, I think, the proteomics work and loads of other future expansions. And just to give you an example of quite the scale of that, across the whole genome and whole exome projects, we had 15 different organizations collaborating in a pre-competitive space, the majority of whom were pharmaceutical organizations. I think that felt to me pretty unheard of at the time, but the value prop there was really, really simple. This was data that needed to be generated. Doing it at a fraction of the cost is much better than any competitive advantage you might have got by doing it yourself. You bring that data, you do the analysis, and the thing with UKB is that it not only brought the value to those organizations, but it went back out into the research community, and so everybody benefits, the whole research community. Which brings me to my second point, which I think is part of what Faisal was saying there, is we have a responsibility to make sure that data is accessible, that there is that return of investment. And I think, outside of the commercial industry, we as UK Biobank need to make sure that we make that data accessible to as many people as possible in terms of, if you're a geneticist, how do you use the imaging data in the most effective way? If you are a cardiovascular researcher, how do you take the imaging data, the genetic data, and the epidemiological data and pull that together? So how do we make that simple? And how do we turn the analyses that have already been done into kind of enterprise-level layers on top of that data so that people can consume the whole thing as best as possible?
Okay. Najat, would you like to have the
Yeah.
last point?
Sure. I mean, I think that the why is very clear. You talked about it, right? Change the trajectory of human health. I think around the what, maybe I'll put one point on the what and one point on the how. On the what, I would say, I personally measure everything we're talking about by impact that we're having on patients. ROI, super important, evaluation, super important, but at the end of the day, are you actually doing something better, faster, or are you doing something you couldn't do before? Those are the two themes. So I think over the next year, I wouldn't even say several years, because the sense of urgency must remain high. Over the next year, we need to look for each of us as leaders and across the room here, where are we truly having impact? Are we really scaling it? Is this truly making a difference? If not, dispassionately stop doing what is a cool algorithm but doesn't actually solve a problem. Way too often, as we're getting better with data and algorithms, sometimes it's like a cool solution looking for a problem. You got to start with the problem. There's only so many research, you have to start on the right problem. So that's one piece I'll say. Impact, whether it's drug design, drug development, operations, access, the list, manufacturing, the list goes on. The second piece I'll say is building on something that Faisal mentioned, which is super important. As this industry starts to mature, we really have to think about not just the career path in terms of the next role or the next role. I always tell my team, and we have over 150 data scientists, I tell them my development commitment to you is not to be a better data scientist, is to be a leader and a general manager. That's why my philosophy has been combine technical disciplines, so you have substance, so whether it's science, data science, with business acumen to actually know how you drive that into impact that helps a patient in the middle. So why is that important? I would say we need to challenge ourselves as an industry to say, in senior leadership positions, why is it just a pure scientist? Why is it just a pure commercial leader? Why is the CEO only from one specific discipline that we have done for the last 20, 30 years? The leader, I wouldn't even say the future, but should be of the now, is somebody that knows how to integrate many different disciplines. Because at some point, data science will be part and parcel properly of what we do, and then we'll be talking about the next innovation. So you need leaders that are agile, that are hungry, that are curious, that can learn all of these different approaches, inspire to build integrated teams. Very important point around integrated teams. At Janssen, we now have a data scientist on every clinical development team. Why? Because if you don't have the equal share of voice, no matter how great your idea is, it won't be translated into the core of our business and therefore have impact, right? So you need leaders that actually understand different disciplines. Second, that can build these integrated teams and not just build them, but really empower them so that they have impact, so they're co-citizens. And then the third piece is to do it all in a sustainable way that has impact for patients, but also builds a sustainable business engine. Because let's face it, if we don't have a sustainable business, we don't fund R&D, and that loop that we need to actually drive innovation is limited. So I would challenge not just a data scientist's career path, absolutely, but look at the tech industry. Some of the most senior leaders in tech industries are those that have many different multidisciplines, but starting a lot in the tech and the business aspect. So those are the Two thoughts I have.
I know we're at time, but I just wanted to refine that just a little bit more, that I think it's important as we look at cross-functional expertise, and I completely agree with you that business acumen and cross-functional mindset is needed. How do we enable data scientists, people, say, who have a Ph.D. in machine learning, to gain those skills, to develop in that space? Well, the cautionary note that I'll end on is I've talked with many colleagues from biostatistics who say, I'm the expert biostatistician on the product team, but I don't think I have a path to being the drug medical director or the VP for that asset commercially. And personally, selfishly, I don't want data scientists to end up with those same ceilings. So how do we enable folks who are perhaps not business-oriented, who are algorithmic analytical geeks and nerds, to develop those skills, to grow and be coached and be mentored, to perhaps be open to those opportunities?
And the onus is on us, right, as leaders, is to actually, like, for instance, every single use case that we work on, project that we work on, whoever, even if it's the most technical person, I'll say, why are we doing this? Help me understand the scientific rationale, the business rationale, the technical rationale. And I always say, if it was your own money, would you invest in this? Right? So that in that way, day in and day out, it's not something that happens now and then and you send them to a development leadership program. Every single day, how do you train people? I have seen some of my best leaders who started off saying, listen, I'm a coder, I want to be behind the computer. And I said, listen, that's not going to work. Because at the end of the day, you have such great ideas, you don't want to be behind a wall and that being translated by somebody else. You translate it yourself. We work in an environment, at least I can say in my team, and I've had great mentors before, that you have a safe environment. I said, you fail, that's fine. You're learning, right? And I think that's how you create a bottoms up and also top down. Top down, the mindset has to change. That's not just us, right? That's overall across the industry. But bottom up, that's the way we can lean in and day out.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the discussion. We are heading to the end of the session. I would like to thank you. Let the dream come true systematically, day after day. We still have some challenge ahead. Thank you so much for being here. And